Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren were clearly at odds during the 7th Democratic debate in Des Moines, Iowa, for the first time at this level since the Democratic primary began. Not unusual was a minor disagreement over policy, with Sanders opposing a trade agreement that Warren supports. Their heated disagreement over what was said during a private meeting, however, was unusual, to say the least, as was their post-debate squabble. Sanders and Warren, sometimes described as the first and second most progressive senators in the country, have, up until now, been allies both on and off the debate stage. They've known each other since before Warren ever entered politics, and have often referred to each other as friends. Then, just weeks prior to the Iowa caucus and days before the Iowa debate, the political truce and personal friendship seemed to have broken down. In this video, I'll talk about the context and consequences of this new progressive beef. I'll address, if not answer, how this dispute came about, what was and wasn't said, and who does and doesn't have credibility when it comes to a variety of claims surrounding the conflict. I'll also discuss the wider ramifications of a fault line developing in the progressive movement, in hopes of answering the question, what really matters?
Governor Feud is a woman, and there are other, not a whole lot, I think there's one other woman governor. There are the mayor of San Francisco is a woman, and there are many women mayors, but not enough. And one of the very important things, and I hope that all the girls in this class understand, that you, just as much as the boys, have a right to become president. There's not been a woman president, although there was a woman who was giving thought to running for president this time, from Colorado, a woman named Representative Schroeder, gave some thought. So I hope that the girls will think that they have the right to be involved in politics quite as much as the boys do. It's beginning to change, but it's not changing fast enough.
Back in December of 2018, the New York Times reported that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren had met privately. The report claimed that neither senator had sought each other's support, nor had they discouraged one another from running in the 2020 election, although a pertinent story to the recent feud denies that latter claim. Both Warren and Sanders would soon join the race, and given their apparent cooperation throughout 2019, most observers believed that the two had made some kind of non-aggression pact during this private one-on-one meeting. A full year would go by before any details about the content of the meeting would be made public by either Sanders or Warren. Just days before the Iowa debate in January of 2020, two stories emerged that would change everything. Politico published an article claiming that the Sanders campaign had provided volunteers with talking points aimed at criticizing the electability of various top candidates in the primary race, including Elizabeth Warren. On Warren specifically, the document said, "I like Elizabeth Warren, optional. In fact, she's my second choice. But here's my concern about her. The people who support her are highly educated, more affluent people who are going to show up and vote Democratic no matter what. She's bringing no new bases into the Democratic Party. We need to turn out disaffected working-class voters if we're going to defeat Trump." It's worth noting that we don't really know who wrote or approved this list of talking points. If Politico had discovered that it came from Sanders himself, or a top-level advisor like Jeff Weaver or Nina Turner, we probably would have heard about it. The document could have come from a staffer, perhaps one with authority over volunteers. It might have come from a volunteer, it might have come from a random troll who managed to get into their Slack group, or even a plant from another campaign or political group interested in seeing a rift emerge between Warren and Sanders. Whatever the case, to me the argument here is not a particularly negative or aggressive attack. In fact, in a recent video of mine, as it happens, I argued that Julian Castro was correct to point out that Warren would be a less divisive nominee for the Democratic Party than either Sanders or Biden. Was I trashing Sanders here? No. He's my favorite candidate in the field, despite the fact that I acknowledge that a slightly less progressive option would be more acceptable for more conservative Democrats. I was just pointing out that that's a fair point, much like this document of dubious origin makes a fair point against Warren's electability. She is supported more by wealthier and more educated people who are in turn more dependable voters. And yet, Warren's reactions seem to be fairly dramatic. I was disappointed to hear that Bernie is sending his volunteers out to trash me. Bernie knows me and has known me for a long time. He knows who I am, where I come from, what I have worked on and fought for, and the coalition and grassroots movement we're trying to build. Now, it's possible she initially overreacted because she didn't understand the full context of this story. Perhaps she just read the headline from Politico, which was, "Bernie campaign slams Warren as candidate of the elite." Warren might easily have read this to be a violation of their secret non-aggression pact, if there was one. It's also possible, however, that Warren did understand the full context and was cynically attempting to inflame the issue to shake up the dynamics of the race and in turn potentially increase her polling and fundraising. Indeed, it didn't take long before the Warren campaign was fundraising off the story, sending out an email that referenced the alleged Sanders campaign memo and argued, "This type of attack isn't about disagreeing on the issues, it's about dismissing the potency of our grassroots movement." The fundraising email would go on to rehash discredited arguments about Sanders causing unusual levels of division in the Democratic Party. As a party and as a country, we can't afford to repeat the fractionalism of the 2016 primary. To win in November, we need a nominee who can unite a broad coalition of Democrats. Ironically, claiming that Warren can unite a broad coalition of Democrats, and by implication that Sanders cannot, seems to speak to his electability with the exact same level of hostility as an argument that she doesn't draw in unlikely voters. It is noteworthy that Warren's decision to fundraise over the controversy comes just a couple of weeks after news broke that her fundraising for the fourth quarter of 2019 had dipped down to $21.1 million, far behind the $34.5 million haul reported by the Sanders campaign. The second story, which fueled this feud, broke just 2 days later. CNN published a story with the headline, "Bernie Sanders told Elizabeth Warren in private 2018 meeting that a woman can't win, sources say." Those sources were apparently Warren campaign staffers or advisors, as well as Warren herself. As CNN reported, the description of that meeting is based on the accounts of 4 people. 2 people Warren spoke with directly soon after the encounter, and 2 people familiar with the meeting. After publication of this story, Warren herself backed up this account of the meeting, saying in part in a statement Monday, "I thought a woman could win, he disagreed." It's theoretically possible that among the 4 sources were Bernie staffers, but the CNN story likely would have indicated that, if that were the case, no one other than Warren affiliates or Sanders affiliates would have been able to give credible second-hand accounts of this meeting. Obviously, only Sanders and Warren herself could give first-hand accounts. It is literally a he said, she said situation. While the CNN article published the account from Warren's team as if it were fact, Bernie Sanders, the only other first-hand witness of the meeting, denied the account. This was noted briefly in the article, but when the dispute was brought to the debate stage for the 7th Democratic debate, which was, as it so happens, hosted by CNN, once again, Warren's side of the story was treated as gospel, even immediately after Sanders denied the account once again.
Senator Sanders, I do want to be clear here. You're saying that you never told Senator Warren that a woman could not win the election.
That is correct.
Senator Warren, what did you think when Senator Sanders told you a woman could not win the election?
So not a huge surprise there, CNN is biased against Sanders. During the 7th Democratic debate, both Sanders and Warren were given a chance to reiterate what they had already put out in the press. Sanders denied the claim, citing several facts as evidence. Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump in the popular vote in 2016, making the underlying claim somewhat illogical. Sanders had deferred to Warren in 2015 and would not have run had she decided to run then. As far back as 30 years ago, he was encouraging the idea of a woman running for president. Indeed, here is Sanders saying that a woman could win the presidency back in 1988.
The real issue is not whether you're black or white, whether you're a woman or a man. In my view, a woman could be elected president of the United States. The real issue is, whose side are you on? Are you on the side of workers and poor people, or are you on the side of big money and the corporations?
While not pushing the issue on stage, Warren didn't back down either, answering the question,
"What did you think when Senator Sanders told you a woman could not win the election?"
by saying,
"I disagreed."
The tension over this issue was not limited to the debate itself. At the end of the event, Elizabeth Warren refused to shake Bernie Sanders' hand. The body language, to me, made her look petty, as handshakes are typically offered freely as signs of party unity and civility. But a hot mic actually picked up the audio of the exchange, so let's listen in.
I think you called me a liar on national TV.
What?
I think you called me a liar on national TV.
Let's not do it right now. You want to have that discussion, we'll have that
Anytime.
discussion. You called me. You told me. All right, let's not do it now.
I don't want to get in the middle of it. I just want to say hi, Bernie.
Yeah, good.
I've often wondered over the years whether Bernie and Liz, who have often claimed to be friends, really are friends, or whether they're just strategic allies and their claims to friendship were just for the cameras. This exchange sounds to me like one between genuine friends who are genuinely upset with one another, which is kind of heartbreaking. If that is the case, the feud that has emerged between Sanders and Warren would seem to be real, a dispute rooted more in personal feelings of betrayal than in political strategy. That said, there are clear, predictable political consequences of the tiff and plausible tactical motivations. The feud between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren could potentially benefit either or both candidates. For Sanders, the fight means casual supporters might be increasingly motivated to tout Sanders as the only real progressive in the race. Anti-establishmentarians on the fence may also lean more readily towards Sanders, as the mainstream media appears to have repeatedly sided with Warren on matters that seem very much in dispute. On the other hand, Warren appears to benefit most from the conflict. In the fourth quarter of 2019, her fundraising dipped, as Sanders brought in another large haul. In the polls, she has also been suffering, both nationwide and in Iowa. In order to have a chance of winning the Iowa primary, Warren's campaign would want to have a game-changing moment during the 7th Democratic debate. That indeed happened both because of the onstage drama and because of the two new stories that came out in Politico and CNN just days before the event. So the timing of the feud is pretty fishy. Other competing campaigns could also benefit significantly from a progressive rift, as the cooperation between Warren and Sanders seemed to aid both candidates. While we've seen aggressive attacks involving Biden and Harris, Biden and Castro, and Klobuchar and Buttigieg, the leading progressives have long refused to attack one another, on or off the debate stage. Everyone from Donald Trump to the DNC to the mainstream media have also from time to time demonstrated animosity toward one or both of Sanders and Warren. Understanding the complex, sometimes incoherently overlapping interests of various potential actors is important because, as we've seen, the origins of this spat are murky, to say the least. Whatever their cause, the split between Sanders and Warren could have wide-sweeping consequences for the American left. If they fight, so too will their followers, and a divided progressive movement is unlikely to accomplish much. One labor leader, speaking to The Intercept, captured many of the concerns of progressive observers of the new rift, and actually takes it one step further than I would. Sarah Nelson, president of the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, said, "These new hostilities have been needled and fostered by people who want to maintain control in this current system. It's the age-old ruling class strategy of divide and conquer. The only way the people win is through solidarity. So stop beating up on each other, figure out how to find common ground, and get back to talking about the issues that matter, like healthcare, the dignity of all work, and the existential threat of the climate crisis." The only place I part with Nelson here is that I would not necessarily assume that the wedge was driven intentionally by the establishment. I personally am a bit suspicious of both Politico and CNN. Both news organizations have recurrently woven pro-establishment bias into their reporting, and I have on several occasions pointed out anti-Sanders smears propagated by CNN, its programs, and its hosts. YouTube channels that have spent a lot more time on this than I have identified endless occasions when progressive politicians have been misrepresented, quoted out of context, or otherwise unfairly criticized by strawman arguments by mainstream media organizations, including CNN and Politico. That said, there is little evidence to suggest that the spat between Warren and Sanders was designed by the mainstream media or Democratic establishment. Plenty of explanations are possible. Sanders may have told Warren a woman was unelectable, and she held her breath on the matter until she found out about the electability talking points, which perhaps he secretly drafted himself. Or perhaps Warren's campaign planted those talking points to initiate a context of conflict in which she could float a lie about what Sanders said in their one-on-one meeting. Or perhaps the conflict was drummed up by some other nefarious actor. Or perhaps it has been the result of a series of honest misunderstandings. We'll likely never know for sure. But regardless of the cause of the rift, the effect is the same. Since the debate, both candidates have shown signs of at least attempting to move past the feud. Still, supporters have continued to bring up the matter in campaign events. While the fight between two old friends could potentially be resolved in a single discussion between the two of them, healing a divided progressive movement is another matter. Sanders supporters have already lost trust in Warren, and vice versa. At the end of the day, the greatest chance either Warren or Sanders has of winning the Democratic primary is if the other is willing to drop out, put their full political weight behind the other, and in turn be offered a cabinet position, perhaps even the VP slot. The power of a Sanders-Warren ticket, or a Warren-Sanders ticket, however, is significantly reduced if the supporters of one candidate hate the other. While I personally have preferred Sanders as a candidate, I have long-standing sentimental attachments to Warren as well. After Warren fought hard to pass the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, I had high hopes that she would run for the presidency in 2016. When she decided not to run and instead Sanders entered the race, I was surprised, given his long-standing status as an independent and policy preferences that were quite aligned to my own, far to the left of every Democratic nominee since FDR. When Sanders far exceeded the expectations of most, I was delighted. So I certainly have a pro-Sanders bias, but I also have a only slightly milder pro-Warren bias as well. All the same, heartbreaking as it may be, I have very little concern for the health of the friendship between Warren and Sanders. If their personal relationship is permanently poisoned, so be it. What really matters is their political alliance and the strength of the progressive movement. While both Sanders and Warren may be interested in pushing past their personal fallout, neither seems to be willing to accept the blame and admit that they were the liar. Clearly, one of them did lie, or at least misremember. But again, that doesn't really matter. What matters is that if elected, either of these two would be by far the most progressive president the United States has seen in several decades. Both have a proven track record of getting progressive things done. Both have incredibly progressive plans, and whatever their personal faults, are unlikely to fail to fight for a Medicare for all healthcare system, a wealth tax, sweeping environmental reforms, and a host of other progressive changes. For any of that to happen, Donald Trump needs to be defeated in the general election, and Joe Biden needs to be defeated in the primary race. Added together, the supporters of Warren and Sanders far exceed the supporters of Biden. Divided, they certainly do not. For a progressive to win the nomination, it is highly likely that it will be necessary for the supporters of Sanders or the supporters of Warren to switch their support toward the more plausible candidate. Not only would a progressive candidate need to win more delegates than any other, they would also likely have to secure a majority of delegates. That's 50% plus 1, because if the convention goes to a second round of voting, the superdelegates will have the opportunity to cast their votes, potentially against the prevailing wishes of ordinary Democratic voters. So that's really what's at stake here. Progressive voters now have to decide whether this trivial dispute will cause them to go down with the ship of their favorite candidate, or whether they're willing to look past personal gripes and vote for the most likely progressive alternative to Joe Biden. Will they think strategically or emotionally? Will they ask, who do I love most? Or will they ask, what really matters?